The impossible situation. Sarah Mitchell stood outside Cafe Luna on a Saturday afternoon, holding her 6-year-old son Jake's hand while trying to calm the anxiety churning in her stomach. At 29, Sarah had been single for 4 years since her husband's death in a car accident, focusing all her energy on raising Jake and keeping their small household afloat on her administrative assistant's salary. Dating had been the furthest thing from her mind. But her friend Emma had been persistent, insisting that Sarah deserved happiness and companionship, and had finally convinced her to agree to a blind date with someone Emma knew through work. Sarah had agreed only because Emma had promised to watch Jake for the afternoon, giving Sarah a few child-free hours to remember what it felt like to be something other than mom. Then, an hour ago, Emma had called with the flu, her voice hoarse with apology. No babysitter. No backup plan. Sarah had tried to cancel, but Emma had already given the man Sarah's number, and he had texted saying he was looking forward to meeting her. Canceling at the last minute felt rude, especially since Emma had built her up to this person as someone special. So here Sarah stood holding Jake's hand, preparing to walk into what would surely be the most awkward coffee date in history. First impressions. Marcus Wellington sat at a corner table in Cafe Luna, checking his watch and wondering if Sarah Mitchell would actually show up. At 37, Marcus had built Wellington Technologies into a successful company, but his personal life had remained frustratingly empty. Most of the women he dated seemed more interested in his wealth than in him as a person, and the constant suspicion about motives had left him cynical about relationships. Emma Mitchell, his company's marketing director, had been talking about her friend Sarah for months, a widow raising her son alone, working hard but barely getting by, someone with a beautiful heart, who needed to remember how to smile again. Emma had painted Sarah as genuine, kind, and completely unaware of Marcus's wealth or position, which was exactly what had made him agree to this blind date. When the cafe door opened and a nervous-looking woman entered holding a small boy's hand, Marcus felt his expectations shift. Emma hadn't mentioned that Sarah might bring her son to the date. The woman, Sarah, presumably looked around the cafe with an expression somewhere between mortification and determination. Marcus stood up and waved, making eye contact with Sarah across the room. The apology. Sarah approached the table with Jake practically hiding behind her legs, his small hand gripping her jeans. The man Emma had set her up with was handsome in a quiet way, kind eyes, an easy smile, wearing jeans and a casual sweater rather than trying too hard to impress. Marcus? Sarah asked, her voice wavering slightly. Sarah, it's nice to meet you, Marcus said warmly, then looked down at the little boy peeking out from behind his mother. And who's this? I'm so sorry, Sarah began, the words tumbling out in a rush. My babysitter canceled at the last minute, and I couldn't reach you to reschedule, and I know this is completely inappropriate for a first date, but I didn't want to stand you up, and... Marcus held up his hand gently, stopping her anxious explanation. It's completely fine. Please, both of you, sit down. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness in his tone, the lack of irritation or disappointment. She pulled out a chair and helped Jake settle in beside her, pulling out the coloring book and crayons she had brought to keep him occupied. This is my son, Jake, Sarah said, placing a protective hand on her son's shoulder. Jake, can you say hello to Mr. Marcus? Jake peeked up at Marcus with wide blue eyes. Hello, he whispered. Hello, Jake. Marcus replied seriously as if greeting a fellow adult rather than a child. I'm glad you could come. I was actually hoping this wouldn't be too boring for just the two of us. An unexpected response. Sarah stared at Marcus, uncertain if he was being genuine or just polite. You don't have to say that. I know having a 6-year-old at a first date is weird and awkward, and I completely understand if you want to. Sarah, Marcus said gently, his eyes meeting hers with steady warmth. I smiled when you walked in with Jake, not because I was pretending it was fine, but because it actually is fine. Better than fine, actually. How could this possibly be better than fine? Sarah asked, bewildered. Marcus leaned back in his chair and something in his expression shifted, became more vulnerable, more honest than Sarah had expected from someone she'd just met. "Because it tells me everything I need to know about you," Marcus said simply. "You came anyway, even though it was awkward and uncomfortable, because you didn't want to be rude. You brought your son because he comes first in your life, and you're not going to pretend that's not true just to impress a stranger. That kind of integrity is rare." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. Most people wouldn't see it that way. Then most people would be missing out on getting to know someone remarkable. Getting to know each other over coffee and hot chocolate for Jake. The conversation flowed more easily than Sarah had imagined possible. Marcus asked Jake about his favorite subjects in school, his friends, his hobbies, and listened to the answers with genuine interest rather than the glazed politeness that some adults showed children. "I like drawing," Jake said shyly, showing Marcus a picture he had colored in his book. "Mostly dragons and spaceships. Those are excellent subjects," Marcus said seriously. "Have you ever tried drawing them together? Like a dragon flying a spaceship?" Jake's eyes widened with wonder. "You can do that? In art, you can do anything?" Marcus replied, and Sarah watched her usually shy son warm up to this stranger with a speed that both touched and worried her. As Jake returned to his coloring, Sarah and Marcus talked about their lives in careful, getting-to-know ways. Marcus mentioned working in technology, but didn't elaborate on his position or the size of his company. Sarah talked about her job as an administrative assistant and the challenges of single parenting without making herself sound like a charity case. "Jake's father died 4 years ago," Sarah said quietly when Jake was absorbed in his coloring. "Car accident. Some days feel easier than others, but Jake is the reason I keep going." "He's lucky to have you," Marcus said, and something in his tone made Sarah look up to find him watching her with what looked like admiration. The reveal an hour into what had become a surprisingly pleasant afternoon, Jake tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Mommy, I need to use the bathroom." Sarah stood to take him, but Marcus gestured to the restrooms near the back. "They're just there. We'll be fine if you want to take him." When they returned, Sarah noticed Marcus had ordered Jake a cookie and was setting up some kind of drawing game on the napkins, connecting dots and creating collaborative pictures. "You're really good with kids," Sarah observed as she settled back into her seat. "I have a 7-year-old daughter," Marcus said, and Sarah felt her heart sink slightly. Of course, a man this kind and patient with children would already be married or at least attached. "Oh," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Emma didn't mention that. Emma probably thought I should explain myself," Marcus said with a slight smile. "I'm a widower too. My wife died 3 years ago from cancer. Emma is with her grandparents this weekend. Or I might have brought her along to even out the numbers." Shared understanding. The revelation shifted something between them, not just that both were single parents, but that both understood loss, the responsibility of raising a child alone, and the challenge of moving forward while honoring the past. "It's hard, isn't it?" Sarah said quietly. "Not just the practical parts of single parenting, but the dating part. Wondering if you'll ever meet someone who understands that your child will always come first, that you're a package deal. Most first dates don't respond well to that reality." Marcus agreed. "Which is why I'm so glad Emma's babysitter got sick today." Sarah laughed despite herself. "That's a strange thing to be grateful for, is it? If everything had gone according to plan, I would have met you without Jake, and it might have been pleasant and nice, but I wouldn't have seen what I saw today. How naturally kind you are with him, how patient, how you put his comfort above your own, without making it a burden. That matters more than any conversation we could have had alone." The truth emerges as the afternoon stretched into early evening. Jake began to get restless, his energy depleted from being good for so long. Marcus suggested they walk to the nearby park, where Jake could play while the adults talked. At the park, watching Jake climb on the playground equipment, Sarah asked the question that had been nagging at her since Marcus had mentioned his work. "What do you do in technology?" Emma was deliberately vague, which makes me think there's something she thought might scare me off. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then smiled ruefully. I own Wellington Technologies. Emma is my marketing director. She thought if you knew I was a CEO, you might assume I was like other wealthy people you've met and not give me a chance. Sarah felt the ground shift slightly under her feet. Wellington Technologies, the company that just expanded to Cedar Falls and hired hundreds of people. That's the one? So when you said you wouldn't have to worry about impressing me with your job or money, I meant it, Marcus said firmly. Sarah, I've been on dozens of first dates where women Googled me before we met, where they knew my net worth and saw a meal ticket rather than a person. Emma specifically didn't tell you because she wanted you to meet me as just Marcus, not as a CEO or a millionaire. Processing reality, Sarah sat down on a park bench, processing this information while keeping one eye on Jake as he slid down the slide. I don't know how to feel about this. Part of me wonders if this whole setup was some kind of charity project for Emma's poor friend. Marcus sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Emma set this up because she's been telling me for months about her remarkable friend, who works harder than anyone she knows, who's raising an incredible kid on her own, who deserves to meet someone who would appreciate her. She told you I was single, kind, and good with kids. Neither of us was deceived about what matters. But the money changes things, Sarah said quietly. People will think I'm with you for that. My son will grow up with advantages I never had. It complicates everything. Or, Marcus said gently, it simplifies one thing. You'd never have to worry about providing for Jake again. You could go back to school if you wanted, or start that nonprofit Emma mentioned you dream about, or simply spend more time with your son instead of working overtime to make ends meet. The real beginning 3 months later, Sarah stood in Marcus's kitchen making dinner, while Jake and Emma, Marcus's daughter, worked on an art project at the kitchen table, their laughter filling the house with warmth. The transition from first date to relationship had been gradual and careful, with both Sarah and Marcus moving slowly to protect their children and their own still healing hearts. Emma Wellington, Marcus's daughter, not her friend, had bonded with Jake immediately, thrilled to have a little brother to play with, while Jake had blossomed under the attention of both Marcus and Emma. Sarah had been surprised by how naturally they had all fit together, how the awkwardness of that first coffee date had evolved into comfortable family dinners and weekend outings. You know what I learned? Marcus said, coming up behind Sarah and wrapping his arms around her waist while their children were absorbed in their project. What's that? That the best relationships start with honesty, even when that honesty is awkward. You brought Jake to our first date, not because you wanted to test me or make a point, but because you literally had no other choice. That forced us to be real with each other from the beginning. Sarah leaned back against him, watching their children work together. Emma, your Emma, said something interesting yesterday. She said most kids worry about their parents dating because they think a new person will take their parent away. But she's not worried because she saw from the beginning that you were looking for someone who wanted to be part of a family, not just part of your life. That's exactly what I was looking for. Marcus confirmed. And what about you? Are you still worried about people thinking you're with me for money? Sarah turned in his arms to face him. I've stopped caring what other people think. I know why I'm with you, and it has nothing to do with Wellington Technologies or your bank account. It has everything to do with the man who smiled when I showed up to a blind date with a 6-year-old, who saw that as a feature rather than a flaw, and who has shown me every day since that both my son and I are exactly what he was hoping to find. For the record, Marcus said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, you apologized for bringing Jake. But that little boy and his incredible mother were exactly what I needed, even if I didn't know it until you walked through that cafe door looking mortified and brave at the same time. Sometimes the best love stories began not with perfection, but with honest imperfection, with single parents doing their best, with last-minute babysitter cancellations, with 6-year-olds armed with coloring books on blind dates, and with 2 people brave enough to see those complications not as obstacles, but as opportunities to build something real.